Okay, we begin. Like I have on people that I also speak to on the phone and regularly. So like as soon as the headphones come on and that voice, it's just different. Besides that, I'm camera shy. All right. I found myself a new venture, being camera shy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes me like a little to get into my own skin.
Yeah. This is special. This is very special.
Yeah. So we know each other for a number of years. Initially introduced through family.
Yeah.
My wife's family are friends with you for many years. And our relationship is through my growth, my inner work, my emotional development, my inner growth, inner child work. And then there's a network or a world of people that know you through your work, your artwork and your painting work and the projects you're working on and have created. I think there's like, two different Michoels that the world knows. And I'm curious for both, the world that knows your artwork, maybe to share more of the work that I know that you do, and specifically your latest venture that you offer for people, art.
Yeah, right. Inner work through art, hands-on, either individual, groups. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the world that I think a lot of the people watching this are friends that don't know anything about your other world, like the artwork and how did you come about it, like a Jewish Hasidic artist. What did you say they called you, the Jewish?
Oh no, that was
a joke.
That was a video that he titled "The Jewish Van Gogh" just because,
right?
But,
so that's like, and then my circles are the circles we know each other in. Like they don't know much about your artwork.
Actually, interestingly, there's during the years there's been a number of like reporters work. They came to exhibitions that I was doing. I traveled the world for many years and I did exhibitions all over the place. Mostly they were through Chabad, but there are other places, but mostly through Jewish organizations. And one time a whole article came out. I was interviewed. And the title of it was Michoel Muchnik, the antithesis of Asher Lev. Okay, do you know who Asher Lev was?
No idea.
Okay, there was this book came out called The Chosen.
Yeah,
very controversial book and everything, and really it was sort of anti-Orthodox or Hasidic or something like that. It was in the 70s, and underlying. And the character, it was fictional. The character in the book was born into a Hasidic family, and he wanted to do art, and they gave him all kinds of hassle, and you can't do it, and it's this, and it's that, and it's not for from kid, and all this kind of stuff. And he actually left the Yiddishkeit, and then he just did all these like really strange things with his art, like real heavy duty stuff and everything like that. So they said, I'm like the antithesis of that.
Right.
I was like, a hippie in the 60s, and I'm like, I'm like, I was doing art all the time, and then I became Hasidic, and then I did my art in it, and even utilized it for like whatever.
Yeah, like thinking of my childhood and the options I had as a grown up, as a career artist was not on the list.
Yeah.
Not because my parents said it's not okay. It's just not something that people. Maybe today a creator is more a little bit closer, but definitely not in the way you have done it. So how'd you come about art? Did you do art since ever? Were you ever like something else? A warehouse manager that we don't know about? Maybe a tax collector?
I actually remember when I was in art school, right? And my father was paying for it. But he says, like it'd be nice if you made a few bucks on the side, right?
Yeah.
So
sure.
I like became a busboy at like the Pancake House or something. After
so there is a career besides art.
After 3 days, I called my father. I said, "Listen, I'm here to study art and do whatever. I study art, whatever was going on over there. You can imagine in 1970 what was going on in an art school. I can't even tell you. It's amazing anybody came out of there alive altogether. But in any which case." And I said, it's taking me away from my study. I can't have to concentrate.
So you took it serious.
Yeah, whatever. But listen, look, I tell you like this. I don't remember as a very young child having like specifically I was like into art thinking that this is, but my mother, Leah Sholem, was very creative. And we lived in a predominantly non-Jewish neighborhood.
Where was that?
In Drexel Hill, Philadelphia. We were not, we went to conservative synagogue, a small synagogue, we were like that kind of typical Philadelphia. A lot in Philadelphia is like called the conservative capital of the world, conservative at the time. Now it all waned because people with the younger generation didn't stick with it.
Right.
But it was just very interesting. So we just did all kinds of creative things. And she was very much, she'd like to make us in the costumes and this. And we would run all these things in the neighborhood. Like we made it like we made our own miniature golf in our basement and things like that. We had all just very creative things. And I didn't realize that it really did have an influence. I think. When I became 12 or 13, it became much more of a serious...
Like an obvious...
Or when I was 15 and 16, I really got into it and I wanted... that's where it's...
Like that's when you wanted it as a career? Like if something you want to do? You actually thought of making a living doing that?
To apply at college, yeah, that's what I wanted to do.
So you thought that's what I want to do and somehow support myself doing that?
Well, my father, who was a navigator in World War II, sort of alpha man type, the main thing I used to hear from him more than anything was, look, whatever you end up doing as a career and for your job, you're going to spend most of your waking hours in life doing it. It should be something you love.
Right.
So when I told him I want to go to art school, he says, you are not. But
he wanted you to have a paying career.
But he paid for it because he thought, look, maybe there's an architectural school in the maybe I'll transfer.
He didn't come to see the school beforehand. Like
it was actually considered one of like the best art schools and expensive in the whole country. Actually, Rhode Island School of Design.
Right.
Then I decided to become acrobatic. Then I decided to go to yeshiva.
So how'd that come about? You drew, you created art before you went to yeshiva?
Well, it was an art school. I did things. I sold even a couple things. My art went through many, many changes. And it really mirrored my life changes, really, in a certain way. But one thing that's very interesting about all the different periods is that the attention to detail is so, I really use the word insane because it's a little bit insane.
Your attention to detail?
It's a little obsessive in a certain way, but that's, no matter what I did, there was always...
So the common
thread
in your work is that you pay attention to detail of your work.
It's almost impossible for me to
not do
wean
that.
myself from that.
I so want to pull out your thing and just start doing all this Michigan throwing things with complete ease.
No, I mean, I can do that. And sometimes it's...
You ever do it? Like you randomly decide, okay, I want to challenge myself. And
you know when I do it? When I feel stuck. And by the way, when I'm working with people who are stuck or artists who have it like they're stuck, it's called artist block or whatever.
Yeah.
So you have to get them out of they're in a spin basically, or they're stuck in a formula or something like that. And that's when you can utilize this type of thing. You just bring out some materials they never worked with, or just something completely different, and it just changes the paradigm.
So it activates something else inside, which means something else starts drawing or playing or...
It does activate something else inside. I remember one time I had this in art school. Whatever I was doing, I needed to go to do something new. And that's hard for an artist because usually it takes time to develop a style. And then I had this rapidograph, which it's like it makes little dots or little lines, whatever you want. Very, very fun. And I just took a big piece of blank paper and I just put a dot in the middle. In other words, I had to like cancel everything and just start with a dot. And then I just, somewhere nearby, I just took the dot and I just did a line. And I did this. From that, what ended up was I don't know how, I went to the library in the school and I took out books on old antique toys And I started making this whole series of art, like these. It was really, I was using those as like ideas for the character, the things. And now it's so interesting because I do some guided meditations when I'm doing these hands-on things.
That on a blank paper sounds familiar from the work you've shown me.
Well, I've actually, I didn't connect it now to that, but I've actually, and I go, and we go we close our eyes, I have music, about finding your nakuda. A nakuda in Hebrew, everybody who's listening probably knows, I don't know who's your audience, but nakuda is a point. It means you're like people go out to look for the infinite. You look at the sky, it goes on forever. People think of time going on forever. Like the people, if you count and it doesn't stop. So you think of how you can try to get in touch with an idea of something which is infinite, where you're thinking like you're trying to think about Hashem and all. I think people do all kinds of stuff. Or, you're trying to...
People do all kinds of stuff.
Becoming more popular.
Yes.
So I came to realize that you can go also within infinitely also.
Mm.
We're created from the infinite. We have the infinite in us, but you can go also...
Right, having the infinite in us is inwardly finding the infinite. So
right.
the nakuda that you find, which you do now with... like sharing with people this tool is to just put a pen on a blank paper
and just
hold it. First holding the dot.
Yeah, first just physically. There's always something, and I've learned this from the few things that I've either experienced myself or seen with, let's say, you want to call it somatic type of thing, where something to do with the body. So when you're actually holding something and you're feeling that point, you can actually get into a whole meditation with it. So about that it really is not a physical thing. It could just be that the end of one line stops there and then the next line stops. So really it doesn't really take up space altogether.
Right.
And what's interesting about this stuff, if you're dealing with a more learned Jewish mentalities or people who've learned Torah or something or Chassidus, then you can very easily find different things that correlate to that.
Right. Right. We always talk about among our, when we talk about this stuff, we always talk about the meditation and the process of Ratzah V'Shava.
Right.
Like that always happens. And then what's life? There's the Ratzah, there's the Shav, and then there's a Nakuda in the middle, or a pulse in the middle, or a heartbeat that comes as a result of both. So let's say if my head is in a spin, and in your case, you said it was a creative spin. So if I have a spin, a one tool to start with is to stop, is to just focus on the dot.
Right.
So I would take a pen and a paper and put the pen on and just focus on the dot, and then notice, really embody the dot, feel the dot, sense the dot in me. Right. So I'm finding for a place in me that's an akuda within me. That's just what? That's being. That's
right. It's usually very calm, very calm and very still.
And you utilize breath in this practice.
Yes, I do. I feel
like we're gonna go backwards. I have so many questions about back in time, but also it's gonna bring to
if people are gonna watch this podcast, they're gonna have to get used to this going back and forth. Because I know you and I know me. Okay, and if they're willing to take the roller coaster ride with us, that's fine. Right. Okay, there will be people who will be totally glued to this.
And honestly will be like, what is he into
people
now?
Will go have to take, some Advil. I got that. But anyhow.
Right. So if I want to focus, if I want to stop the spin and access something new or creative or whatever it is that I need, but something good. I want to access a place of goodness. Right. So the one method is from the work you're recently sharing is to put my pen on a paper and simply notice the nakuda, the dot, and breathe in.
Oh, the breathing is I have people I'm not doing, look, we know breath work. I've been to breath work. We do. That's a whole thing unto itself when you get into it as the breath.
We're talking of breath, but just to notice it.
I always have people, when I close, I always have them do is any way I can explain to them what a circular breathing is. Just breathing in, breathing out, but just relaxing. They shouldn't be thinking about their breath so much because they're trying to think, but it just gives them a relaxed thing. And then I use very, very beautiful, usually very calm, beautiful music sometimes, that just...
That helps me calm my brain and my hype nervous system into like finding that point.
Right.
And then from that point, things can be created. And it's interesting that you're doing this now with people, and then you just shared the story where you did that all these years back.
Yeah, it's very, it's really fascinating.
So cool that you've done this all along.
And I go back to the things and I'm thinking, like, what can I learn from it, or why did that happen, or what was actually, what was I in touch with? It's like a net. I don't know. It's just a thing. What's really fascinating that I found is that, and I've learned this from the work that we've done with together in different places, going within or just doing, is this self-judgment and judgments from others that adds to our spin. Mm-hmm. So I have this whole thing, this one workshop which I started to develop. Again, I haven't done too much of this yet because I'm busy with my art, but I just keep doing it here and there, but I'm planning to do more. But there's one workshop, it's basically the byline is I can't draw a straight line, but drawing a straight line is overrated. It's like this, and it's basically a workshop for people who feel like they always say, oh, I can't even draw a straight line. That's the line. It means I can't draw. I'm not
when
creative.
You want to invite people to creativity, the first thing they say is, I can't even draw a straight line. They wouldn't even
come to something like this. But when this is the title of the thing.
The title is, I can't even draw a straight line.
The people who come are actually people who, when they think about it, they would like to do something, but they think that they cannot.
And they also think that it needs to be drawn straight.
That
somehow that's how art is made, straight,
but almost
or
art
perfect.
Exactly not, right?
So there is a layer thing with art that I'm noticing. So it's an interesting story. So I'm sitting today on my couch, and I'm reading a book that's titled, very typical for what I'm reading. It's titled something like how to manage stress anxiety, something it's so like not creatively titled that I actually bought the book. It was in the pharmacy on the stand, and then the first they put sometimes authors will put a quote just to get started, like they put someone's quote, they put a Bible quote, and I'm like, what did I buy? Okay, I bought a Christian self-help book. Interesting, but it isn't. I guess the author is religious, because I saw at the end that he has 2 pages of biblical phrases that can be used as meditation, which is interesting to see in a secular world, like in our circles. It's cool to do that, to find prayers and tefillahs that are meditative.
You can always find it. If it's something that's working and it's true, you can always find it someplace. So
I'm sitting there reading the book, and it's really cool. It's very dumbed down, simple tools. Just basic techniques. He talks about breath work. He talks about, not as breath work, just taking in breath to calm the nervous system. Anyway, I'm reading this book, and across of me is a picture, a painting that you gave us as a gift.
Oh, okay.
And then you walk in here with one piece of art, exactly that one.
2 pieces I brought.
So what he was talking about, you brought 2, and one of the 2 that you brought, out of everything that you could have, was that one of the things that he read. I don't know where I read that. I don't even know if it was that book or not. But one of the things I read is that a lot of art isn't what you put on it; it's what you did not put on it, like the contrast, right? So when something like, there's so much information now out there.
Are you talking about physically or actually content?
So he talks about any kind of content that people put out. There's so much content available these days that creativity is almost like, what am I not putting on it?
Right,
which creates a contrast.
You could go crazy even deciding what am I going to paint.
Exactly. So I looked at the olive that's on my wall, and I'm thinking to myself, it's so packed, but it's only so cool because everything around is empty. Like, you want to bring it?
Yeah, sure.
Right. So I'm reading this thing, and I'm thinking of what that writer writes, and I'm like, that's exactly what's happening here. It's not what you put in here, which is amazing, but what brings my attention to it is that everything around it is not it. Like, it's not a painting of a house; it's a painting of an olive.
Well, it's very interesting. In art school, we learn there's a thing called negative space. Mm-hmm. That olive can form, if you're just talking about the shape, can form by either just painting the olive on top of a background, a light background, right?
Right.
And that's the positive space.
Right.
If you wanted to, you could paint the whole background and just leave white the olive.
Right.
And that negative space also becomes the focal point.
Right.
No, so but you're talking about you could use that spiritually. You
Yeah.
can use it this. There's many things.
Yeah. I'm bringing it up for the spiritual meaning or the tool in it. How did this come about? You knew you were going to do this way? Or you started with an olive, like you remember?
There's a little bit of a history. I made this out of very, very detailed engraving, which is the finest type. If you ever look on a dollar bill, originally that they had different artists do hand engraving so that
Really?
they couldn't have one artist copy the exact style.
Wow.
If you look, but it's done where you engrave with a certain very fine, called a burin, into copper and then inked, and why I loved it so much because it could be the finest. Anything I could get to where you almost should need a microscope to see, that's what I used to do. And I made an olive. I actually sent a copy of it. I sent it into the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Of this when it was
No,
done?
when it was this little tiny
Olive.
like it was only a couple inches
wow.
tall, but there's all the details. It was very similar to this. But the bottom was a landscape. It didn't have any people in it, and it didn't have all those houses in it either. I don't remember either. The funny part is you know me, like I forgot to put the painting in. And the secretary calls and he starts laughing and he says, you said you forgot to put the picture inside.
You had a letter attached to it without the actual painting?
I was like, so. Any which case, then later I took this. There's a beautiful explanation of this from the Alter Rebbe, from the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, okay? And there's a whole story about how there's a whole story where his son, Dov Ber, when he was a child, became the next Rebbe. That was the Mittler Rebbe. But the Alter Rebbe hired a teacher to take him and teach him. He was a little kid. And the teacher was like, he understood this is the son of the Rebbe, is a big achrayus, a huge responsibility, and he didn't feel that he was, like, he didn't know what to do. And like, how am I going to teach the son of a Rebbe who could easily become the next Rebbe? Talking about a different
There
type
was
of
like a
neshama.
pressure for him.
So the Alter Rebbe just calmed him down. He said, start with the Aleph. He said, and teach him the following. The Aleph is made up of a Yud above, a Yud below, and a Vav connecting the two. And he said the Yud above is a Yud of all the letters, like represents the Nakuda. It's like a little, it's a point. It doesn't have that much form. It's just like and even more so, the top of the Yud is called Kutza Shal Yud, which means the thorn of the Yud. And there's sometimes Kesser, but it's like a crown is on top. It's in other words, it's Hashem higher than what it's Hashem from his essence, right? Is really the Kutza Shal Yud represent, and so the Yud above represents Hashem. The Yud below represents the Jewish people. I was just elaborating on the words, the simple words that the Alter Rebbe said was the Yud above represents Hashem, the Yud below represents the Jewish people, and the Vav is Torah and mitzvahs connecting us, or Amunah.
Right.
There's different versions of the story. I decided to make a poster for children. Now this is actually a much later version. So I made a poster, and on the poster I put that about the Aleph, the Yud above, the Yud below, and the Vav in between, looking at a couple lines with nice font and everything. In those days, it was very expensive to do color printing, and you had to get color separations made, and that was like the most expensive part of the whole process.
What does that mean, color separate? Did
they had
each
to,
color?
I don't know how they did it. They're able to filter out the three primary colors.
Oh, and then
it
print
comes
it separate?
printed in dots.
Wow.
I don't know.
It was a big deal. Got it.
It just was a lot. It costs a lot of money. So people weren't just not printing things in color.
Right. When I was a kid, I didn't either. I remember
it was
that.
very expensive. But this I had to, it was for a color picture of mine. I wanted to act exactly the picture that I drew.
And it was this already, what I see?
It was a different version. It was a different version. This is much more painterly. The one was more like an illustration type thing. But I'd already done that, and then I happened to send it to the Rebbe just to tell them I'm going to be printing this. It was for a bracha, and the Rebbe said that there was only a landscape, like a whatever it was, I don't remember. It's like a sort of like an Israeli landscape
in here in the bottom.
It's like I made like more earth and heaven and.
Got it.
And the Rebbe said that Yiddish represents Jewish people, and that's what you're writing on the poster. You should have pictures of Jewish people. You should have a woman with a tichel and a little boy with tzitzis and whatever. There should be. So I ended up making a whole Shabbos tish there, and I did all that. And there's tzitzis hanging out the back, and then she has and he's a Hasidic guy, whatever it is. And then I had to redo, and it cost me a lot of money. I had to redo.
You reprinted everything.
I didn't print them yet. I had to do the color steps again.
Right.
But I did, and it became a very nicely popular thing hanging in people's homes.
Right.
This is just an updated version, but just to explain, and I really should show you another piece of art I did in art school back in the 60s. I had not become Baal Tshuva yet.
Wow. What were you on, man?
Yeah, well, something.
You mentioned the 70s, and you haven't shown me the 70s.
So here
I
you
wasn't
haven't
born
seen.
then.
Yeah, you haven't seen this. I don't think people who were there and people who were involved in all this stuff.
What is this?
It was so. There was
like
a lot of.
It looks like a Malchus and
intensity.
It looks like a kingdom and creatures and
there. Yes,
it looks like a psychedelic jungle.
Yeah, well, you got it. That's a good term for it. Psychedelic jungle. If anyone could have put a better title to this, that's pretty much what I would call this. And
you wrote this? Like this was the hand.
This is what the one that I told you I did make the dot. This is all made up of that work with that kind of pen. Okay?
What is this? On cloth?
No, it's just paper. What's fascinating to me is I just pulled it out now because I was thinking to come here I should pull out something from. What blows me away looking at this is you can sense that there's an incredible amount of energy in this. There's a certain pulse. There's just a lot of energy. And now thinking back into it, it's like I had all this creative energy, like a lot, but not just. That just represents my own. What do you want to call it? Spiritual desires. I don't know. Whatever you want to call it, and it's really quite misdirected. There's no direction to it, really.
Do you know what's happening here?
There's no. It just whatever came out. It's not. There's no
completely. Is this the same? These two?
No, they're not the same.
No, they're not. Right.
No, they're not the same.
Right. So you started. You know where you started on
as
this
a piece of art. I think this is an absolute incredible piece of art.
Right.
But there's more to life than what something. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, but I was looking for searching. Then when I became, Baal Tshuva, and that was through a whole series of events and everything like that, look at the different.
This is from the beginning of your from art career?
Well, not this particular piece.
Like the original of it.
But yes. But it was color, and it was, I call this one like more, there was a lot of auros. There was a lot of light that came into the world in that time, if you want to call it a spiritual awakening, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. But it was not yet so much directed. Like it was like in Chassidus explains, Oros lights have to be in the kalim, have to be in vessels. Otherwise, it just gets
right. It's wild. Just a wild.
And that's what this is. Whereas
there has to be like limitation constantly with openness. There has to be a combination of what are these? These little knives?
No,
or
they're like columns.
Columns.
It's like you're going somewhere, but the whole thing is just fakakt. But it's so deep.
Did you sign it? I don't see a signature.
Well, I don't think I ever finished it, but I don't think I ever would finish it. It just was could have gone forever. It wasn't even about finishing or starting.
It wasn't about anything. It was just about art.
And it wasn't even about art. It was just letting. Well, it was a bit about art.
But it was you did sign it right here.
Oh yeah, there you go.
You did write it. But 71.
This now, after I spent 2 years in yeshiva, and then first of all, my art. As soon as I became like Shomer Shas, I started getting into. I started painting color. Like it started color. Like my life changed. I was actually so excited about it, and I just sort of got all into it. And the Rebbe told me, actually, I asked that while I was in yeshiva, I shouldn't really do art. I mean, not that it shouldn't interrupt the schedule of the yeshiva. So I would do things like Motzi Shabbos or something. But for 2 years, I really wasn't. After 2 years, when I started doing, I actually got married, and then I was, started doing my art to make a living at it. The artwork I was producing was just, I loved the Chassidus, I loved the Mashalim, the parables, and there were just so many ways that I wanted to, and that's what I did. I took a specific idea, a concept, and I found a way to bring it into a piece of art.
Right. Which is pretty fascinating, looking at the direction of this and the words that this have and the emotion that this has with no words. It's like, if I can, like, we can put words to it, but it's not going to explain it. But this we could explain.
Right.
And that's the kunst, I think, in life. I think the conversation we're really having is how to direct ourselves in life. I'm going to move this here for a minute. The conversations we usually have is like, how do we navigate life?
Right, and there's a lot more joy in that than there is. Was not. There was tremendous intensity, tremendous whatever creativity, but there was. You can see that there's something very disturbing. You would say the person doing this was not exactly what you.
Do you feel like this is you?
Very happy.
Do you feel like this is you when you look at it?
At the time.
Yeah. Do you feel, looking at it now, does it feel like this is you?
Now?
Like you're not you now. Your work, your hands, your writing.
I know what I was living through, of course. I mean, I'm not
So interesting. So there's something about directing creativity and directing art and stopping and feeling into an akuda, like to a point, and then that expands. There's something to it always. Like it seems like that's a lot of how the process of your art is made. You mentioned to me that like one of the things that you've always had, regardless of what you were creating, was the detail.
Fine
and the detail. When I hear it, it's like the patience.
The what?
The patience. When I hear detail, I think patience. You say detail, I think patience.
Oh, like your client?
It takes patience.
Oh, patience.
Patience, yeah.
I thought you meant.
No, like gedild. Like I'm like when you say the detail, and I'm looking at this, and this is like written, like pen made.
But see, that's
like that.
We talked about this before we started the whole podcast. We were talking about how we perceive ourselves, how other people perceive things.
Right.
And
there's such a gap from how I perceive myself and how I perceive others to how it actually is on both ways.
Right, exactly. And if it does take patience, then maybe that's why I'm not so patient with other things, because I use it up in this. But I have to say that when I'm into it, and I'm even that, either of those, when I'm into it and I'm just into it, I'm just into it. I don't think that I have to be getting somewhere or that.
Right. So we're looking for things.
Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think
that's something we do together with the work.
Yeah, I think that we're looking in life for things that feels that way. That takes a lot of patience and detail, but while doing it,
you're there.
I'm there and not on the clock.
Yes.
And that's like hard to find, I think.
Oh yeah.
In life, I think that's what people are searching for. I don't know if people are looking for things that bring value to others, bring value to themselves, and are very detailed and meaningful. But in the process of doing it, it just feels like freedom. It feels free to do it, and that's something. I'm lucky whenever I feel it. That's what I think. When I feel that way about things,
you feel so
very
good
lucky.
when you feel that, right?
Yeah. And it's enough. I don't need any. I'm not craving anything.
You feel like why can't this just hold?
Yeah.
Why can't I just be in this moment and feel this? But what I've found is that when you have those experiences, then it's a reference point. You always know you can actually go there. And if you really make a little effort, or just like stop.
Right. So
breathe,
if that exists
that
in me,
thing.
if I can find it in me, then it exists. I can access it again. It's a resource. It's something I can go to.
Right.
In NLP, they have this concept of resourcing. Like, okay, if I'm in an anxious state,
Right.
and anxiety is not helpful right now, what would be helpful? So I resource to something I've already experienced to utilize in this,
Right.
in
right.
whatever I'm doing, I'm engaging in, but it should in a helpful way, in a useful way.
Right.
So yeah, so feeling the way you feel when you do this detailed work, and it doesn't feel it doesn't feel difficult when you're in it.
Right. Right.
That's something.
right.
Okay, and now you're doing it with people.
Right. Like, for instance, I meant to mention it before, but let's say someone comes and they feel that they can't draw. They can't do anything. They don't, So part of the process is what I do is, it's so interesting because I've learned a little like process with inner child work, right? So you can use it with this. You can actually take a person back to, like, even if they don't remember it, but you can actually get
You
them
mean
to
you
a place-
remember what, a time in childhood?
Yes, where, like, or I'll just say it and then guide it, like, a little meditation that, that just think of yourself as when you picked up your first piece of chalk. The first time you ever had any kind of awareness that you're doing something,
Drawing,
but taking
playing.
a piece of, a crayon, and then how exciting that must be.
Right.
Like,
For
it's
the
just
kid.
right?
Yeah.
And then I say just the fast forward, it could be the next day where you picked up the chalk and you started, drawing on the wall. And then your mother came in and smacked you,
Yeah.
No, you can draw on the paper, but you can't draw on the wall or something. So right then and there's already a block. There's already you're going to call it trauma, but for all practical purposes, we'll just call it like that, where
There's a block with taking the pen and going.
there's a judgment there.
Yeah.
You can't do, this type of thing. Or fast forward to your, whatever it is, that's not how you draw a face. But all these artists.
Right. And imagine someone telling you that's not how you make an olive, but then this is how you make an olive.
Right, all these things. Then what happens is then the judgment usually comes from outside.
Right.
And then the judgment gets internalized. I can't draw.
Right.
I don't know how to draw.
Right.
I'm told I can't draw. This kind
Really?
of thing. No.
You were told
Not
you
me.
can't draw?
I'm quoting what a person will think in their
People
head.
will think
so
that they
they're in
can't
their
draw.
spin. So then once I get them in touch with that a little bit, then you can get them like to the next stage, and then you actually have them start doing something. So I had actually, it was a couple that came. Both
Okay, I'm amazed at the couple work you've been up to. I told you this, and I'm saying it again.
There's something with this.
There is something about, like, in coaching and in work and in whatever the work I engage with, there's a certain experience in relationships that I have come to, I've come to with Layli, and I know other people have, and it's very hard for me to put it into a tool or words or an explanation. It's like, it's the who's letting go and who's holding on, who's the pursuer, and who is the and do I want to now pursue, or do I want to be pursued? And that whole dance creates so many fights. And like, you did it, you didn't do it. That whole thing, it's like, and also to learn to fine tune that dance, like who's
By the way, it's
one.
not just marriage couples. It can be a boss and an employer. It can be any relationship.
Right, totally.
Anything.
Totally, because the employee expects the raise and the employer expects the work, and who is the pursuer and who is the being pursued, who's the one initiating and who's the one following, and who expects, and what are the expectations. So I've had a hard, like, I've never managed to find a way to, besides the process of life that works. Like, if I'm true to myself and I keep opening myself up to the best version of me, that happens. Like, that experience of knowing, which one to be and being okay with it, like whichever I need to do. And also, for the best part is when both happen simultaneously. When I can be the pursuer and the doer and the holding and feeling held at the same time, like feeling like I'm nurtured while I'm nurturing. That's a wild experience. And what you've shared with me, you do through art with couples, blew my mind.
Yeah, I
really enjoy it. I've never seen anything like this. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. And it's with just, I think what occurs is that.
Can you share more? Like, how's it work? What do you do? So there are a couple.
What
couple
you're
comes-
talking about, one person holds their hand on top of the other person's hand that he's going to draw. He holds the pencil. The bottom person holds the pencil. But the bottom person doesn't draw. They just surrender to the top person, and the top person moves the pencil.
Right. But then the top person is actually not holding the pencil.
They're not.
So there is
They're
both
only holding
happening at
their
the same
hands.
time.
And then I do it the other way around. And then what's interesting about this kind of work is that things happen all the time that you weren't expecting, or, you learn. And at some point I realized I started adding the third dimension, which is where they actually they do the same thing again, but this time they consciously are trying to figure out a way to do the same
movement, the same drawing.
I put music on. It's not like they're drawing something. But I had people where actually top person actually wants to draw some kind of particular thing.
And he has the other hand. The top person wants to draw something particular.
Like I had these two girls.
It sounds like
right?
a typical couples fight, right? The top one person wants to draw something specific, but they can't do it with.
Well, the other person must be surrendered to what they're doing.
Yeah.
But some people have very hard time doing that.
Oh.
Because in their mind, why are they pulling my handle all over the place? You learn a lot about where people are holding from this. And with couples, it's like, why don't you let me do it? That's kind of, and it's just funny. But then what you do,
it comes a point where they just let go, and it happens.
Well, I had this one couple do that, and then I had, and they are holding together, and I said, now try to find a common. And they ended up doing it was just back and forth. They realized they just couldn't figure out one thing to do together. When they were doing this, they don't talk about it. Afterwards, they tell me what's going on. One would surrender to one, and then the other one would just then surrender to back. It was just a back and forth thing, but it's so much healthier,
right, than the fight.
And it's also like you can see that there's something between the people. When I've had groups do it,
you said something about a high school.
No, so I did them as a group, but I had these two girls, just whatever, it just happened that they were doing. I had them doing this thing separately, and when it came to the third one, and they were really, one was actually drawing she was trying to draw the name of the other person. The other person was resisting it because it was just like. And here she feels like she's trying to show her Avis's role, and the other one's it was a whole to-do going on. The third thing was when they were actually trying to come to it, they actually did end up like either drawing a figure eight. So they actually got in thing, and they were actually figured out that
not
if we
verbally. It's all
with it's just all
without
with
saying anything.
Eyes closed to music, eyes closed completely. And they were actually, and one of them blurted out, "Oh my God, we're like doing this together."
Wow.
And what was really interesting at the end of it, it just, I don't know, at the end, for some like weird reason, that the shape came out like a little heart.
Wow.
And then we were talking about it, one of them had just took up a colored pencil and like painted it in, So
it became this
no, it was a beautiful
work
connecting thing on a deeper level.
Wow.
And now some people would have trouble like connecting or doing things. When I feel when you have some piece of art, it takes away the personal. Do you hear what I'm saying? It's quite fascinating.
It's really wild. That specific experience of the surrender game, like who is surrendering and who's in charge, is unique. But I've seen a lot of other things before this one that we've done. That you shared with me. It's just free flow writing.
There's things to do.
So nice.
It has to do with Ches Gevora and then Tiferes, which is a combination of the two. Feeling, like how do you integrate certain like a nice thing and then things which are like actually very jarring. How to just like these things are like parables for life. They're fascinating.
Right. And then to notice that you've done this 30, 40 years ago with your own instinctively to
that
just
one
start.
Thing I mentioned, pretty much I was in the dark. But anyway.
So talking about you in the dark, I have a question.
Right.
Okay. So you're from Very frum. I always say this, like in the spaces we meet.
You don't know who's from. Okay, just
like in the spaces we meet, you're this very like religious frum person. I don't know. This question keeps coming back to me. On the previous episode I did, I had the same question, and it's like, how do you navigate your frumness, which is so rigid, right, with halacha and the rules, and your complete openness? Not only openness in your creative flow, fine, but your openness with people, like your acceptance, and you're really like non-judgmental, and that other, that part of you that is so like, how do you balance the two? How do you balance a free flow of just being and acceptance and light and I guess 70s? And
look,
then
I look at the 70s not as exactly all light. A friend of mine once said the 70s where we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. We just didn't know it was a train coming in our direction. Oh, it was a great line. Light needs to vessels. It needs to be integrated. It needs to be grounded. It's an interesting question. I was thinking about it.
No pressure at all.
No, it's not a matter of that. It's that, first of all, I don't find halacha, if you want to call it, or being frum, rigid. I just don't. I mean, it's a typical thing, especially years ago, the early Baalei Tshuva we're very zealous, want to do the whole thing properly, and we're very, you can do this, you can't do this, there was a lot of that, but as time has gone on, and then you become more normal with it, and you start to think, what is. You become to integrate. You become integrated with the whole thing.
I love that line. I think the fact that you see it so different than the way I asked that question is really, really cool. Like, I don't find halacha to be this creativity buster thing.
No, but see,
and to me, the fact that I'm asking, I know I asked this on the last episode, the same question, like, how can a person find their inner best self if they're constantly, bound by so many rules? And
I think there's a general question about how do we integrate all these rules? If you want
life,
halacha,
any rules,
right.
Law,
and right.
Like
everyone
law.
has.
How can I be myself if I can't drive 90 miles an hour when I feel like it?
Right.
So.
I mean, one of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach was that you have to have courts of law.
Right.
It's a universal thing. We just have more details.
Right.
But the fact is that right. I really think you have to understand. I became first of all, through Meir Abasera, Olav Shalom, who was like a very spicy Sephardic Jew from a huge yichus of tzaddikim. So only a very spiritual person. And I was involved with Maccabox, and he was involved. That's how I came to meet, but he became Baal Tshuva, and I ended up joining in and all this kind of stuff. It's a whole long story. But there's like two things going on when a person is just trying to, here, I came from the 60s, which was like, was like basically let it all hang out. Everything was just freebie, like do whatever you
right.
want.
And is that what your thought, like psychedelics? Like when you hear psychedelics being...
Well, that in the time to me was also just...
Is it psychedelics, drugs?
It had nothing, like there was no practicality to it. It was just like, go experience any kind of, spiritual thing that you can get on. When I say spiritual, it doesn't mean spiritual is good. There's spiritual things that are lousy, that the realm of the spirit.
Right, just follow the spirit and spiritual.
Or just spiritual things or stuff like that, things that just got me... different consciousness, anything. Some of it was escapism, and some of it was just looking for God, I think. Looking for Hashem, really. I have to be honest with you. A lot of us just don't do well being born into this lowly world, Well, it talks about that.
Well, Adam Balkarchach never, what's the sentence? Like we didn't really
choose.
Yeah, there is. It also says that we chose exactly this life. So I guess there is both in life. In life, there's the not choosing
there's
it.
Always the.
We're like we don't want to be here, and then we want to be here, and we literally chose every detail of it. What a spin to things. Like I don't like any of it, and I like every detail of it. It's my state of mind depends which it's going to be.
I'll have to think about that one. For the next podcast. Anyhow, so
You and Yiddishkeit,
what?
that's where we were. Right, and your acceptance.
No. So I'm just saying. No, the only point I was trying to make was about this, which is I think important because it's an interesting conversation with you particularly, and especially because you know that a lot of the people that we associate with and interwork with us are people who were brought up
ultra orthodox
and
Hasidish.
just for either whatever reason it didn't talk to them, certain things didn't talk to them, they didn't
Well, I keep hearing how so much of Yiddishkeit is a giant trigger to people of like
because of their different abuses, different not doing it out of enough love, doing it too much out of fear,
right.
or God was chosen for them, they didn't really choose God. All kinds of things, post-Holocaust traumas in these communities that played into the actual lifestyle of
Orthodox Judaism,
in many places. But what was interesting for me is about Tshuva, so this is how I first came from, and then I went to Lubavitch Yeshiva, and then we're talking learning Hasidus, and so my whole introduction to real Yiddishkeit, it was from a very spiritual place. Mm-hmm. Even though it was very hard to go from there and then to become
observant.
And you can only do this, but then I'm not that time, and all these kind of things when you're actually living a life which was totally hefker,
or free,
was a big. You can't imagine those days what was going on. Like some people couldn't make it through; they just bounced out. It was too much.
Right. So the spiritual
they couldn't
part
take
of
the
rules.
It was too hard to integrate for them at that time.
Right.
Let's say years later, maybe
the spirituality was fine. It's just the restriction or like the way to do it was difficult.
Integrating it into where you fit in with this, and doing some of it. But having said that, it's like what you were asking me about the details. So it's about the halacha or something like that. Is that when you learn if you learn Hasidus about these things, every little ounce of halacha and all these things they're all in spiritual realms. They really have stuff that is exciting, and you just look at it differently.
An experiential, soothing way of living rather than a rigidness to it. Like every detail of
that there's something.
Right.
Not that every aspect of living Yiddishkeit is soothing and
every aspect of the deeper
challenges,
explanations.
There's all kinds of stuff.
I think that
how to deal with it.
Yeah, I think I think that what I've heard from you is that like if I learn the Hasidic explanations for these things that are just like do like this, and I understand the meaning of it, they have a very meaningful and helpful.
They change the paradigm.
Yeah. A very helpful and meaningful opportunity in my life, like to give me in my life.
Like it's very interesting. Especially, I spend a lot of time with especially younger people who have been brought up in some of these communities, and even in our own community, and like something turned them off. And a lot of times, you really go back to it. It's really more either family thing or in yeshiva, the way they were treated, or they didn't have anybody to talk to, and they really were not happy, and they felt like not successful, just judgment, all this stuff, and then
beliefs.
And then they sort of turn off, or they go here and there, and they want to do, but they try and integrate. It's frustrating for me to see it because I came from like the other way around. It's just frustrating to see, is what I'm saying. So I try to offer whatever I can in any way I can to like sort of help introduce maybe some more
different
way of looking at it.
To look to these Jewish practices and the traditional practices.
I think, interestingly enough, is that art was not really a big part of it.
No.
At all.
Well, no.
It was just not.
There's a lot more. Yeah, there's a lot more creativity now. Like Jewish music has taken another spin, but definitely not. Still now as a
No, I'm talking now. It's completely different.
Yeah.
And I love seeing that.
Yeah, and I like that what you offer brings people back to themselves. Like what you offer, like art, as an internal way to come back to me, to the best version of me.
I like that. Sounds good.
like a way to come back to myself, which is my best version of myself. That's a nice thing in a relationship, for us to come back to ourselves, and in a group work, for people to be real and be the best version of themselves. That's cool.
We all have our darker side, we all have that
Shadow.
the shadow, our tendencies, all things. And Chassidus talks about how to deal with that. We have all that stuff. In my art, I just never really sort of painted that struggle, where I've seen some other artists do.
Like the art is the expression of the struggle,
Right.
Which is a common thing in art and in creative
By
work.
some artists.
That's interesting.
And I've thought about, like, am I like in denial? Because I think it's like,
Well, knowing
nice.
you the way I know you, you're definitely not in denial.
No, I'm not talking about that.
You don't have an ounce of denial.
I think that I really think that the way I see certain things in concepts is like, it's like lichtig, and that's what I paint.
I think you choose
know what I'm
to
saying?
do that. I think you
Yes,
choose
yeah.
to share light
Right.
through your art, and that's your commitment in your work. So it instantly turns on that part in you to just do that.
Right.
Like, it's imagine that I decide to coach people, but I'm going to share my shadow, and like that wouldn't be helpful. like
Right.
oh yeah, I'm a loser too. Let's just be losers for an hour and a half and pay me after.
Right, but
Like,
for some
it's
people in the process,
Yeah.
I think it's important for them to paint their pain.
Yeah,
Now, I've had some people do that,
yeah,
and it's actually quite scary what comes out.
right.
And it's scary to them. But it's like, I really think that for
You
some,
never done pieces like that and just didn't sell it?
well, the piece I showed you is
That's
sort
the
of,
one.
It's
That's
sort of
the
like
dark-
that, but I've
right.
had worse.
But you wouldn't sell this, right?
I don't think I would sell that because I don't have that
Right.
many pieces from it left. But
Right. But since then, since you became frum, you haven't done like shadowy kind of both. You didn't crave to have an outlet to do that, like to just like paint
no,
away.
I sort of, I guess it's a true Chabadnik, like I wanted to share,
your shlichus.
teach, shlichus.
Yeah.
I had Yechidus with the Rebbe a few times. In those days, I never really had a big conflict with that.
Right. That's cool. That's a cool observation too.
Right, and I also felt like I was never stifled in being creative about it.
Right.
And I feel that's the Yeshkacha Pratis about, by this divine providence, Yeshkacha Pratis, I've had a history of a lot of anxiety, depression, different things in certain times of my life back then. And it was actually doing the business part and doing the exhibitions at the beginning actually made me sick. I was so anxious about the whole thing. So I wrote to the Rebbe, what should I do? And what should I meditate on? And what to do, the Rebbe said, when you go to an exhibition, you put it aside, a chumash, tillim, siddur, and a pushka. And you give a certain amount of tzedakah beforehand. One thing that used to make me like aggravate a little bit was people would come, and I feel like it's a shlichus, it's a pu'ula, trying to, and people would look at the paintings and see Yiddishkeit maybe in a painting, but it wasn't like a reality. But seeing an actual pushka and a siddur and stuff like that, there's a psychological thing, I think. But talking about, I thought about into many different things. And the giving tzedakah beforehand is like, what's the anxiety? Am I going to sell anything? Am I going to make a lip? La la la. And then giving tzedakah is like, it's like a batochen.
Yeah.
You give tzedakah before.
Right.
You don't wait till you sell and then you give your percentage.
Right.
That psychologically also had a thing. But the third thing.
So what was the first one?
To put a chumash, siddur,
What's the intention of that? Just to make it like this.
The Rebbe told me to do it, so to me, it's also
Yeah,
also
but you have a
for
spin
me
to it.
to know that it's there. First of all,
Right.
when I would do it,
like as a reminder?
it would already calm me down.
Okay.
That I feel like the Rebbe's bracha is with me,
Okay,
or
so that
Hashem's with me,
right.
whatever you want to,
And then the
whatever.
tzedakah is to put that beforehand.
I
And what
think
was
that's
the third
part
thing?
of it. Also, that people sometimes would put some money in the pushka.
Right. Okay, and what was the third
And not only that, the Rebbe wants to. I should decorate pushkas. So it was. It was also some. You know, I mean, one point was selling decorated pushkas.
As your, yeah.
Believe me, it didn't. Not, I made this really one, cost thousands of dollars. It was like huge, really big, like 3 feet by 2 feet. Then it was, I thought, it's a far cry from the day, it was 15 cents for a pushka. They're spending like $1,000 for pushka. And it's in a beautiful Chabad house in Arizona now. It's like really, really something. Anyhow, the third thing was, what should I meditate on? So I thought they was going to tell me, learn this, say for this. I didn't know what, But just answered, meditate on the Hashgacha Pratis.
Wow.
And that changed my life. Because things would happen sometimes. There was times when they put the art, it didn't fit on the plane. I had this little plane someplace, and so it didn't fit. My art was in these big cases. They didn't tell me. They just put on another plane that went to a different city, and I was supposed to go pick it up 2 hours. In the meantime, there was invitations. I got there, and the artwork wasn't there. Things like that. I couldn't get through some customs in Uruguay. I could write a book, and I plan to, but just these stories alone, when you're in the middle of them, when you're in the middle of them, they're horrific. It can really be. But I just had, and certain times things really happen where you saw that you could actually see later, could be 2 years later, something came of it. This happened a number of times.
So meditate to the Hashgacha Pratis.
Yeah, that
wow.
If something's happening and it's not what you plan, right? So I had shows where, I'm setting up and it starts to snow, and there was a foot of snow by the time it was called for the show. The only people that came were the next door neighbors, this kind of thing. We all had big platters of sushi to eat, but I'm just saying different things. There some. But the point was that you can apply this application of applying that when you're anxious, it helps you in anything that when you're having anxiety.
Yeah.
Because most of what the anxiety is you're thinking, it's all
backwards or forward.
Yeah.
And then in this method, there's first of all, this chumash. I guess we'll leave that for everyone to pick of what that represents for them. For you, it's like the Rebbe is here, or Hashem is here.
This forum.
Yeah. That's one. And the second thing that can be good is to take an action as if it's done. Like the first give my tzedakah.
B'tochen.
Is to I trust in the process,
right.
in this. And I take an action for it even though I'm anxious.
Right.
And then the third thing is to notice that there is a divine plan happening. Yeah. And to meditate in that.
Right.
Okay, can you guide me? Can you guide something?
What do you mean?
Guide a meditation of that, of some whatever. Make it up. Or it's something you have.
Oh my gosh! Wait a minute! Right here, right now, without the music.
No music. What? I can turn on music. Whatever.
No, I don't
Just
know if
do
I can
2 minutes.
Like this. What I mean.
Yeah, go for it. I'm ready. We've done this before. Go.
Oh come on, Motty. I'm talking to all of you in the audience. Okay.
Okay.
Would you want this being done to you? Okay. Anyhow.
Well, no one was going to want to come on here.
Yeah,
You'll be my last
your next
guest.
3 guests just canceled. Okay. Well, let's do this together. Well, I come here for you to guide me, and I'm guiding you. Okay, let's just breathe.
I'm super excited about the work you're putting out. Like for so many years, you've done art and sold the art. And now the actual process of art is a tool, is a shluchus, is a tool for healing and growth. Like the actual pen and a pencil and a paper is the tool. Like that's what you've always done. And now I'm so excited for that.
Well, I think it's just, I don't know. Like
you said you're going to Israel. You're going to do some events there with groups.
Well, this is the year of Hakel. And so the Rebbe spoke about this so many times. And it used to be like he couldn't get anybody up off their chair to do anything. It was always like that when the Rebbe brought up these things. And now there's like Hakel
events everywhere.
All around, all kinds of themes.
What does that mean? Can you explain it?
The year after Shemitah year, after the 7th year when they rested from working the land. So then it's called year of Hakel. And in the base of Migdash, the Melech would come, sit on some kind of dais or whatever, and teach Torah. And women, men, children. I mean, it was like would gather.
So it's a year of gathering.
Right, and to learn Torah. So I did a couple of events. So last one I did was 8 years ago, was bigger than the one I did 8 years before that. A visual arts hockey, I called it.
Wow.
The first one, there was hardly any artists around. So I just called up some people who were artists in Crown Heights. So we had like, I don't know, 8 or 9 people come. They're all like sort of artists. And it was just, I'm leading this thing. And like, you see like the eyes rolling like, because everybody's like an artist with their own ideas about things and this and that. It was very funny, actually.
A lot of personality must be.
It was like what, he thinks he knows the only thing about art and da. It was like, you could just feel his judgment and everything.
Yes.
Then the next time already, it was 8 years later, there's so many people doing different things, graphic designs and all that kind of stuff. So I had 1,000 people looking at it, but only like 100 came to the actual event because I said you could watch online.
Right.
And I had a couple speakers, and I spoke a sort of PowerPoint. And I actually did show stuff from the beginning, darkness to light. It was very, very interesting. Now, things just seem to be opening up in these areas. I don't want to take too much time away from doing my art. I don't want to replace.
Right.
But I have evenings here and there, and that's when most of these things
That's when you do
anyway.
that work.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, want to guide me into something?
Yeah,
And the
I don't know
audience?
what you mean by this.
Anything, just a breath. Just do your thing.
I can talk about some of the things that I guide. It's where you start with some very, very hard, either a piece of clay, or you can give the person holding in their hand something very hard, or you can just picture at this point something extremely hard. Okay? And breathe out, and just sort of like be in touch with it, feel its hardness, feel its like.
And a color?
If you want to put a color to it, I'm not up to that part. But in any which case, no, I do that. I do that with colors, like very cool stuff. Putting colors to what you when I have people in a sort of a little meditative state. And they go in, and we're working on something, is to put a color to it.
Got it. Okay, I'm feeling that hard thing.
You're right. And it's basically, now think of it as think of something that's blocking you. Something that's just, you feel is just, you could even feel like it's in the middle, it's somewhere in your body somewhere. It's just some place it's just, you just feel like, or think about it like a creative flow, or you want to express something, you want to do something, and you just feel blocked. And just like meditate on that and just let it experience it. Breathe and just be aware that you are experiencing this in life or in this place and this whatever, and you have this block, and it's taking up space. It just is, just like this thing is taking up space. You feel it. It's it feels very real. Now, I do this with actual objects and different things, or clay or something like that.
I'm there. Then what?
Then it's like, just start to realize it's really not, this hardness is really a little bit your own experience or your own stories around this about what, it's not necessarily truth. Yet it's blockage. It's just, there's different reasons why you feel you cannot do it, or something is blocking you from the inside, outside. So when you get in touch with that, like just pressing into that hard thing, you'll see that it's not as hard as you think, like start to like knead it. Like you need challah, it's just, and as you do that, realize that this thing, because everything comes from above, and everything has breath in it. Just you don't perceive it. But now, as you knead it, feel that it's breathing. It actually has a pulse. It has life, and you're not in control by it. You actually can have more control of it. And just feel that. And just like your breath goes in and out, just go in and out with your hands, and just like, knead that ball, and
maybe create something from it.
And then I go further, and I don't want to give it all away because it's part of one of my workshops, so I don't like to like, you know what I mean? It's sort of exciting things that go on after that.
Yeah.
And I've just had, by the end of the night, you know, like people are actually being able to create something and it's without judgment, without this, and it's just like
Opens up to something.
It opens up. It's a flow. I do something similar to this where it's like the seed rotting in the ground, just a whole. And I talk about the chassidus and what it means, you know.
That's amazing.
And all this kind of stuff.
So
and
cool that you've managed to do that.
Like you actually, it's experiential. You actually feel what it's talking about in the Hasidic idea, you know, what is the target, what it means, what it is. You feel it physically.
Right.
And it says that when Mashiach comes, our flesh will feel. So I think that's why all
we'll sense Hashem, we'll know Hashem.
But you'll feel it in your body.
Right.
It's in many places. It says the body will be mashpia over the soul. Like will actually direct the soul. There's all kinds of.
Which is so cool because it says that Avraham Avinu lived like that. Like how did Avraham Avinu know mitzvahs? Because his body guided him to do them. So we're talking about mind, body, you know, and feeling something that we perceive as rough.
Well, a lot of these tzaddikim, they were sort of living Mashiach to begin with, you know, on a certain level, like, right. But it's like I think that there's a lot of that why are people so much into somatic healings today and different things about feeling it in your body, feeling it because I think that it's the way of us actually internalizing it and getting out of our goalless, getting out of our.
It's going to take more than a thought. It's internalizing
exactly.
it.
Yes,
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This was great. Thank you.
This was amazing.
No, thank you. I was totally honored that you asked me to come. I think it's great.
And I love what you guided me through. It was wonderful. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Hope to do it soon, more and again.